Picking up a recruiting segment from the first segment, and Ohio State picks up a 2022 commit. It's first in Jyaire Brown. Jair Brown is a 4-star recruit coming out of Louisiana. And the bit about this that just shows what the reach has been like for Ohio State just in the past 6 weeks is that Brown is Ohio State's first recruiting win in the state of Louisiana in 15 years. You got to go all the way back to 2004, Jonathan Wells, for the last time that has happened. So they are using this momentum across classes to recruit well. Brown is 6 foot, 165 pounds, and again, he's just going to be headed into his junior season. The thing to like about him is that he can play press man and zone principles. He has tremendous length. He has tremendous speed. He uses his leverage off the line of scrimmage to disrupt routes. And when so many offensive schemes are running timing routes more than ever, that's an important characteristic to have. And it shows what Kerry Coombs is ever to do. But it also speaks to just how much Kerry Coombs has been listening to, well, everybody else in his office. Because the thing that I find to be most fascinating about what Coombs is doing is when he evaluates the film, he forgets sometimes who he's evaluating. So, story that gets told about Coombs by his assistant is that when they were first taking a look at guys that they should offer and or recruit, he's looking at the 22 class, and Coombs looks over at his assistant coach and he says, hey, these guys ain't very good. To which I said, hey, they're 14 and 15 years old. And I'm going, yo, man, that's not ideal. But yeah, we would rather have the 14 or 15-year-older who wants to commit and can play that you can develop than not. I think Jair also puts them in great position to start off their 2022 recruiting class with some significance. And while we don't have rankings for the class 2022 in the team rankings just yet, you should know that there are a number of schools that have commits in the 22 class. Kobe McKenzie still counts for Oklahoma, for instance, but he's going to try to reclassify for this 21 class. We'll see what that means or how that goes. The other thing going on with Ohio State right now is they lost Jalen Gill. In the loss of Jalen Gill, what we've seen is a thinning, right? So when when the Buckeyes lose Jalen Gill to the transfer portal yesterday, nobody raised an alarm. Meanwhile, folks that might need a wide receiver, cough, cough, Oklahoma, might actually want to look in that direction. Gill was a top 30 prospect coming out of the 2018 class and was the 4th highest signee for the Buckeyes in that class. And he was expected to be the starting slot guy by his redshirt sophomore season. That would be replacing KJ Hill, and that would be this 2020 season. But since Brian Hartline had basically come out and said Garrett Wilson's going to move to the KJ Hill spot and play that slot, and you know that they're looking to try to get CJ Saunders a 6th year of eligibility, I think either Jalen saw the writing on the wall or his coaches told him what it was going to be, because they have an embarrassment of riches at wide receiver just now in that I'm taking a look at their all-time recruits, right? Which I always think is interesting to keep in perspective because like Adrian Peterson, for instance, best all-time for Oklahoma in that 2019 class, has 2 top 7 all-timers in Rattler and Hazelwood that end up coming to Oklahoma. So it just lets you know how much better the kids are getting because those rankings are also based on a tier, right? It goes all the way up to 110. 110 is like an NFL Hall of Famer, right? And I don't think anybody's ever scored 110. I think Jadeveon Clowney got close with like 108. Point being, there are 86 scholarship players at Ohio State. You can have 85, right? That's 86 once Gill goes into the portal, and that's why he's not expected to come back either. But somebody's going to pick him up because he is a top 30 prospect and because he does have tremendous hands. He just didn't play a whole bunch last year, and yeah, he was frustrated about it. Matter of fact, I went and looked up comments that he gave during December when they have to make all of the kids available. Again, one of the most valuable parts of the college football calendar is bowl season because many bowls put in the contract, you have to make all the players valuable because we know that media members want to be able to talk to all, or available, not valuable. You want to make all the players available so that the media members find some value, because we want to be able to tell these stories, and we want to be able to tell stories that folks want to hear about. And Gill's was one because, again, being a top recruit and not playing a whole lot can speak to your depth, can also speak to you being in a doghouse. And sometimes you'd rather hold on to that guy, Trey Sermon. Other times you'd rather maybe that guy just go on his way, Jalen Gill. So even as they're picking up these prospects, they can afford to shed other high-value prospects to other folks because they're just getting to be that good at this thing called recruiting with Ohio State. And I've been giving a lot of this credit to Ryan Day because Ryan Day basically hired or kept hired the staff, and because we're talking about watching Ohio State put perhaps two defensive recruits and two defensive players into the first round of the NFL draft, and might be number 2 and number 3 if Detroit doesn't trade out of that position. Somebody else might actually trade in that position to take Jeff Okudah. You can show what we did once we took this thing off Schiano difficulty. You turn around your pass defense. You can show Shaun Wade, Damon Arnett, Jeff Okudah. You can show all of these real great players to go along with Marshawn Lattimore, to go along with Eli Apple and Denzel Ward, not just to the NFL, but to recruits, because that's one of the things they care most about. They want to play with their friends, they want to play where they're going to win, and they want to go into the first round of the NFL draft. Now, with Julian Fleming in this 2020 class, who's one of the highest ranked recruits they've ever signed, you have an opportunity to say that again. And you can go back to watching Ezekiel Elliott and Bosa come out and see we've been doing this for the past decade. Honestly, Ohio State is where we all expected Oklahoma to be. You know, I mean, they won a national championship not 6 years ago. They are right there all the time when we're talking about college football playoff, and they're a win away, right? If they don't get stomped on by Purdue, they're in the spot that Oklahoma was in 2018, right? If Kyler Murray does not have a 4,000-yard passing, 1,000-yard rushing season, we're talking about perhaps Dwayne Haskins competing with Tua Tagovailoa for that spot. It's just been one or two things here or there, but those one or two things have led to such great football play. Because it's one thing for you to be able to put top offensive talent into the draft. I mean, we saw Kyler Murray and Marquise Brown get drafted in the first round. We've seen Baker Mayfield get drafted in the first round. We've seen Cody Ford get drafted very highly in the second round, right? And we hope to see a CeeDee Lamb, a Kenneth Murray, and Neville Gallimore perhaps get drafted in the first round tonight. But you're going to have to show that. And Ohio State's been showing that for years, right? We talk about DBU and we just debate it all the time. We talk about wide receiver U and we debate it all the time. But what we should be talking about is Ohio State on both sides of the ball. The way that we've been talking about Alabama on both sides of the ball. The way that we wanted to talk about Georgia on both sides of the ball, and they're able to put running backs in there, right? We'll wait and see what George Pickens turns out to be, and Dominique Blaylock, and maybe Jamie Newman. Jake Fromm just ain't getting it done. I mean, even if you want to give them credit for Jacob Eason, I don't see him as a first-round draft pick. Maybe he will be. He's certainly got the talent, but Jake Fromm ran him off, and that has to count for something, right? We talking about Justin Fields, who is playing up back for Georgia and was the backup quarterback to Jake Fromm, decided, to hell with this. I'm going to Ohio State. Not going to Oklahoma. I'm not going to Clemson. I'm not going to Alabama. I'm not going to USC. I'm not going to Kennesaw State. I'm going to Ohio State. And then shows up, runs off Tate Martell, takes the job away from Chris Chugunov, and ends up running off Matt Baldwin in the process to TCU, and is, right there in the Heisman ceremony in his first year as a starting quarterback in college football. You have to give credit where credit is due. That's what I'm saying. You also have to take a look at where they were, because depending on how you watch the Clemson Ohio State Fiesta Bowl, you're on one side or another of this. You're either going, hey, if Jeff Okudah is given that fumble that was deemed incomplete, we're talking about a different ball game. Or you're on the side of, if Chris Olave just keeps running and doesn't break off his route, maybe you're still, winning that ball game. Because there were times when Ohio State looked like they outplayed one of the best teams in college football, and a team that up until that point, right, was 28-0, became 29-0, and took their first loss in 30 games against what I believe is the best college football team ever, 2019 LSU, who's going to see the first number one overall pick and Joe Burrow taken off the board tonight, if you believe anybody at all that knows anything at all about the NFL. But as much as we are going to talk about how this is going to factor in to recruiting and how this is going to factor into how teams and programs choose to sell themselves, I also think this is going to factor into budgets. We're talking about a time in which football programs that aren't blue bloods and men's basketball and baseball and softball and women's basketball are all looking at chopping block, right? Some of them are looking at some staff are going to get pay cuts. Some of them are looking at taking on some paying games that they didn't want to take on. Others are looking at the whole programs just going away. If you can show that you put players into the NFL draft in the first 2, 3, 4 rounds and you can sell it, this is the year to do it more than any other year in your school's history, because everybody's up against the wall. If everything magically opened and the coronavirus magically went away on May 1st, we still have folks that ain't going to be able to come back from this. And we're going to have folks that want to give more money that they probably did not have to give after all this stuff, to these programs to make sure that they continue to function. And what are you going to have to tell them? You're going to tell them that, one, your recruiting class is really great and you don't want to miss this opportunity. And two, that you put players into the NFL, right? I've been talking about my alma mater, University of Tulsa. Flog Trevis Gibson and Reggie Robinson to no end, especially if they get drafted in second, third round. You got to show it, right? I don't know about the recruiting class because somehow TU manages to finish 112th in 2020 recruiting, which is asinine and stupid to me. I don't get it. Meanwhile, you can't scroll Twitter without seeing an Ohio State, LSU, Oklahoma graphic. You can't do it. You can't scroll Twitter without seeing how many first round picks Alabama's put in. You know, Nick Saban ain't worried about whether or not Alabama football is going to be around, because Alabama football will be around before when the government ends, when we have mass hysteria, when we have Mad Max walking in the Thunderdome, we're going to have Alabama football. I feel that way about Oklahoma football. I feel that way about Ohio State football. I don't feel that way about Baylor. I don't feel that way about even Colorado, as much tradition as Colorado has. I don't feel that way about Washington State. I feel that way about the teams that are able to show tonight, this is what we do. This is who we are. We want a university that the football team can be proud of, in the street. But at home, at night, we all know that we want a football team that's going to be proud, that wants to go to that university, and so forth and so on. Because as Cardale Jones said while at Ohio State, I didn't come here to play school. I think that is something that we all need to keep in perspective as we continue to talk through this.